Tonight is June 5th, 2026, and today marks day 97 of the conflict between the United States, Israel, and Iran. A conflict that has reshaped the global economy, destabilized one of the world's most important waterways, and raised constitutional questions we covered on this channel 2 nights ago. Tonight, I'm going to cover 3 major topics, each one fully sourced to verified, documented news organizations and research institutions. First, the complete current status of the Iran war, not just a military procedure, but the human picture inside Iran right now. The civilian uprising, the power struggle inside the regime, who the new supreme leader is, and why his whereabouts are currently unknown. Let me go ahead and fix that noisemaker right now. There. Sorry about that. I apologize about that. The IRGC's documented seizure of government control and the latest on ceasefire negotiations as of today, June 5th, 2026. Second, the Strait of Hormuz and its global economic impact. I'm going to give you the exact numbers by country: China, Japan, South Korea, India, Europe, and America, from the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas, the International Energy Agency, the UNCTAD, and the World Economic Forum. And I'm going to tell you the truth about Venezuelan oil, what it actually means for American gas prices, and what the documented experts say about how much it helps. And then third, and this is a 25-minute deep dive, the American economy right now, today. The reshoring of manufacturing, the companies leaving California and where they're going, the investment numbers coming into America, and a fair, documented, two-sided look at what is working and what is still a promise rather than a reality. Everything tonight is sourced. I give you the source as I go. There's no party agenda. The Republic belongs to the people who understand it. Let's ride. Let me start with what happened at the beginning of the Iran-United States conflict. Because new viewers joining the Revere Report, they might need the full documented picture. And here's the timeline from the beginning until today. The 2026 Iran war was initiated by the United States and Israel on February 28, 2026. The opening salvo took out the heart of the Iranian regime, killing Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and triggering a torrent of hundreds of retaliatory missiles and thousands of drones from Iran across the entire region. The conflict left enormous damage, thousands of people dead in Iran and Lebanon, dozens dead in Israel and the Gulf Arab states, and millions of people displaced. On April 28, 2026, the United States and Iran agreed to a 2-week ceasefire mediated by Pakistan. Iran had rejected a 45-day, 2-phase ceasefire framework and proposed its own 10-point plan. Since the ceasefire's declaration, it has been violated by both sides. On April 21st, President Trump extended the ceasefire indefinitely. Issues under discussion in negotiations include freedom of navigation through the Strait of Hormuz, Iran's nuclear and ballistic missile program, reconstruction and sanctions, and a long-term peace agreement. The talks follow extensive damage to Iran's military infrastructure and defenses, as well as to regional energy production. The source for that is the UK House of Commons Library on June 2nd, 2026. As of tonight, June 5th, no permanent peace agreement has been reached. The ceasefire continues to be violated by both sides. Negotiations are ongoing but unresolved. And personally, in my own opinion, there's not going to be any negotiations because you cannot negotiate with a terrorist regime that does not want to admit defeat. What do you think? Probably the same thing. Now, inside Iran, and this is part of the story that most American news coverage has not given sufficient attention to. Because what happened inside Iran when the strikes killed Supreme Leader on February 28th was not just a military event. It was a human one. And it tells you something important about what the Iranian people, not the Iranian regime, the Iranian people actually want. In Tehran and other Iranian cities, Iranians took to the streets cheering with joy, setting off fireworks and playing celebratory music after reports of Khamenei's death. According to witnesses and video footage verified by AFP, the celebrations began shortly after 11 p.m., according to multiple witnesses and audio recordings. Hundreds of Iranian Americans met at Portland Career Pioneer Courthouse Square to celebrate. Bahar Baboudi, one of the organizers at the Portland's Pioneer Courthouse Square, said almost everyone at the protest was born under the regime or has loved ones who still live in Iran. She said Khamenei's death felt like the culmination of decades of resistance. Quote, "This is something that we've been asking for, begging for, crying for 47 years. And finally, it's done." End quote. That source is the Oregon Public Broadcasting on March 1st, 2026. This context matters enormously. The protests that preceded the war, the ones that began in December 2025, are documented history that the American media has largely underreported. The protests, which erupted on December 28, 2025, initially stemmed from economic grievances like soaring inflation of over 40% and the rial's plunge to record lows against the dollar, but quickly evolved into demands for the ouster of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. The unrest spread to all 31 provinces of Iran, marking one of the most severe internal crises since the 1979 Islamic Revolution. The Iranian regime responded with mass arrests, heavy internet restrictions, and localized curfews. The sources on this information is the Global Security, citing multiple verified news organizations. Iran's use of the death penalty increased significantly. Norway-based Iran Human Rights reports that at least 1,500 people were executed in Iran in 2025, an increase on previous years. Following the June 2025 Israeli-U.S. strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities, the Iranian state arrested a reported 21,000 people. This is the regime arresting 21,000 of its own people. The sources of that information is the UK House of Commons Library, June 2nd, 2026. 21,000 people arrested for dissent. 1,500 executed in a single year. These are the documented conditions the Iranian people were living under before the February 28th strikes. How would you like to live in that country? Maybe America's a pretty decent place to live, huh? Now, here's one of the most important and most underreported stories of the entire conflict. Mojtaba Khamenei, the son of the slain Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, was elected on March 8, 2026 to replace his father as Supreme Leader. Key political figures, including IRGC commanders, Parliamentary Speaker Mohammad Baf, Ali Larijani, and President Pezeshkian, pledged their allegiance to him. But here's where the story gets significantly more complicated. With the condition and the whereabouts of Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei unclear in recent weeks, the IRGC is now effectively blocking the president from advancing its preferred candidate, further consolidating its grip over the state's security apparatus. Iran's President Pezeshkian has repeatedly sought an urgent meeting with Mojtaba Khamenei in recent days, but all requests have gone unanswered with no contact established. Informed sources say a military council composed of senior IRGC officers now exercises full control over the core decision-making structure, enforcing a security cordon around Mojtaba Khamenei and preventing government reports on the country's situation from reaching him. The source for that information is Iran International, April 2nd, 2026. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has effectively assumed control over key state functions and blocked presidential appointments. Analysts say the latest developments suggest the IRGC is no longer operating behind the scenes, but is openly emerging as the dominant force in Tehran. That's Fox News citing Iran International on April 21st, 2026. Iran's regime hardliners and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps remain in power, despite U.S. and Israeli strikes. U.S. intelligence believes the regime is not at risk of collapse and maintains control over the Iranian people. The source for that information is Just Security, March 16th, 2026. In plain language, the Iranian government, as of tonight, is effectively being run by an unelected military council. The elected president of Iran cannot get a meeting with his own supreme leader. Government reports cannot reach the supreme leader because the IRGC is physically blocking access. This is a military junta operating behind the facade of a theocratic state. And the men who run it are the ones sitting across the table from American negotiators in the ceasefire talks. Now, the international dimension. Every major power's documented position. Pakistan. Talks between the U.S. and Iran are being mediated by Pakistan, the primary diplomatic intermediary throughout the ceasefire process. The source on that information is the UK House of Commons Library. Russia, Iran's ally, condemned the U.S. and Israeli strikes as destabilizing, but showed little interest in intervening on Iran's behalf. China buys over 90% of Iran's oil exports. The strait closure has directly impacted Chinese energy supply. And yet China has not intervened militarily, indicating its economic interests in stable global trade outweigh its stated alliance with Iran. Oman, which attempted to mediate negotiations between the United States and Iran, expressed disappointment that active and serious negotiations were abandoned. Now, the numbers by the country for the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz carries around a quarter of global seaborne oil trade and significant volumes of liquefied natural gas and fertilizers. In 2025, nearly 15 million barrels per day of crude oil, nearly 34% of global crude oil trade, passed through the Strait of Hormuz. China and India combined received 44% of these exports. The sources on this is the International Energy Agency. The Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas documented that the 2026 Iran war is the largest geopolitical oil supply disruption in history, between 2 and 3 times as large as the largest previous geopolitical oil supply disruptions in 1973 and in 1990. Of course, the source for that, as I just mentioned, is the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas, and that came out in April 2026. Now, country by country, China is the world's largest oil importer, with roughly half of its more than 11 million barrels per day import bill sourced from the Middle East. China also buys over 90% of Iran's oil exports. The sources on that information is the Atlas Institute for International Affairs. Japan depends on imported fossil fuels for 87% of its total energy use, and 95% of its crude oil imports originate from the Middle East. Japan imports 1.6 million barrels per day through the strait. A sustained closure widens Japan's trade deficit sharply, weakens the yen, and tips the economy towards stagflation. The source on that is also the Atlas Institute for International Affairs. South Korea channels approximately 68% of its crude imports through Hormuz, some 1.7 million barrels per day, and has announced emergency contingency planning. The source on that is also the Atlas Institute for International Affairs. India. Qatar and the UAE account for 53% of India's LNG imports. India's petroleum minister reassured markets that diversification was underway, but the structural dependency remains large enough to produce visible economic scarring. The source on that information is CNBC. Pakistan and Bangladesh. Qatar and the UAE account for 99% of Pakistan's LNG imports and 72% of Bangladesh's. With limited storage and procurement flexibility, these nations are especially vulnerable. The source is CNBC, citing KPLER data. Now, in Europe, in 2024, Qatar was the EU's 4th largest LNG supplier, with a 4.3% share of the total. There's no alternative route for LNG, unlike oil, which has some limited pipeline bypass options. The source on that information is FX Street. The global GDP impact. Global real GDP growth in 2026 could fall 0.2 percentage points if the oil supply disruption remains limited to 1 quarter. 0.3 percentage points if it lasts 2 quarters, and 1.3 percentage points if it persists for 3 quarters. The source on that information is the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas. Before I get into the economy here, and this next segment is a deep 25-minute dive into something that affects every American's wallet right now, I want to take 30 seconds and give a genuine shout out to a local Las Vegas business that I personally want to support. because the republic the founders built was built by citizens just like these gentlemen. People who show up every day, do quality work with their hands, serve their community, and build something real. That is the Good Luck Barber. They're at 616 South Las Vegas Boulevard, right on the Strip. Walk-ins are welcome. They do a $10 shave and a $40 professional quality cut. If you're in Las Vegas or you're coming to Las Vegas, go see them. And when you walk in the door, tell them John sent you. That is the Republic. Citizens building things, communities supporting each other. Now, let's talk about the American economy. Now I want to give you a complete, honest, documented, two-sided look at three specific things happening in the American economy right now. Venezuelan oil, manufacturing reshoring, and the California business exodus. I'm going to tell you what the White House says, directly quoted. I'm going to tell you what independent economists say, directly quoted. And I'm going to let you decide what the evidence tells you. That is the standard of the Revere Report. I'm not picking winners. I'm giving you what the documented record shows. Now, let's talk about the Venezuelan oil and if it really helps American gas prices or not. Let me start with what happened in Venezuela because this story requires context. Just mere days into 2026, U.S. Special Forces launched a raid on Caracas, seizing Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro and his wife. In the days that followed, U.S. officials announced that the United States will use its control over Venezuela's oil flows to shape policymaking in Caracas, pressure Cuba and other Venezuelan allies, and drive oil prices down to President Trump's target of $50 per barrel. The sources on that information is the Council on Foreign Relations, and it came out January 23rd, 2026. On January 6, 2026, President Trump announced that approximately 50 million barrels of Venezuelan heavy crude oil are being diverted to U.S. Gulf Coast refineries, valued at approximately $2.8 billion, based on current market rates. This massive transfer of oil is intended to provide immediate relief to American consumers and optimize the operations of the world's most sophisticated refining hub in Texas and Louisiana. The source on that is the Market Minute, and it came out January 8, 2026. Refineries owned by Chevron, Valero, and Phillips 66 are bringing in Venezuelan oil. Before the U.S. seized Maduro, most of Venezuela's exports were going to China, though about 200,000 barrels a day were coming to the United States under Chevron's special license. The sources for this information is the Fulcrum, citing NPR and Reuters, January 21st, 2026. Now here's the full documented picture that requires intellectual honesty. Venezuela produces only about 1 million barrels a day. That's roughly 1% of global oil output. The U.S. produces about 13 million barrels a day. Venezuela's oil is heavy and dense and requires special refineries. Trump has said the U.S. will get between 30 and 50 million barrels from Venezuela, about 2 or 3 days worth of U.S. oil consumption. It will likely take a decade or more before Venezuela's oil production levels could be fully restored. The source on that information is The Conversation, January 13th, 2026. A full-scale resumption of Venezuelan exports would benefit U.S. refineries and lower their fuel production costs. The losers would be Canadian companies that sell similar heavy oil and small Chinese refiners, which would face higher costs if Venezuelan crude diverts to the U.S. The documented bottom line on Venezuelan oil: genuinely beneficial for Gulf Coast heavy crude refiners. Puts real downward pressure on refinery input costs, strategically reduces China's access to discounted Venezuelan oil, but not a silver bullet for American gas prices. The volume is limited. The infrastructure to massively expand it does not yet exist. And the Iran war's impact on global oil prices, climbing back toward $100 per barrel, largely offsets whatever downward pressure Venezuelan oil provides at its current volume. So, judging by that, the Venezuelan oil that we did get from Venezuela really didn't make much difference, but 3 days. But in the future, sometime over the next 10 years, they will start producing more oil on a daily basis. And that oil will go straight from Venezuela to the Gulf of America and visit Texas and Louisiana refineries and become a stable source of oil, crude, for America. Now, let's go on a little bit further here. The manufacturing reshoring. The numbers that the White House puts out versus the independent analysis. And here's a directly quoted White House position. The White House stated in April 2026, President Trump's policies are delivering the largest reshoring wave in American history as companies invest trillions to build and expand here at home. The manufacturing sector capped off the first quarter of 2026 with the first positive manufacturing job growth in 3 years. The broader U.S. economy has now expanded for 17 consecutive months. The source on that is the White House press release on April 22nd, 2026. Here's the specific documented investments. Apple is committing $600 billion over 4 years to U.S. operations. AstraZeneca investing $50 billion. Bristol Myers Squibb spending $40 billion. GSK funding $30 billion. Global Foundries investing $16 billion to reshore advanced semiconductor manufacturing. Stellantis committing $13 billion, the company's largest ever single investment, expanding domestic production by 50%. NVIDIA announced a $500 billion commitment to manufacture in the U.S., including over 1 million square feet for manufacturing Blackwell chips in Arizona and AI supercomputers in Texas, in cooperation with Foxconn in Houston and Wistron in Dallas, with mass production expected to ramp up by September of 2026. The sources for that information is 24/7 Wall Street, and that came out November 2025. The ISM manufacturing PMI in March 2026 reached a multi-year high of 52.7, a leading indicator of manufacturing expansion. Those are real, verified, documented investment commitments. Now, also documented is the independent analyst's position. A Kearney report found that Trump's tariffs might have been a costly way to shift some manufacturing away from China, but they are not accomplishing the primary goal of large-scale reshoring. By creating instability and uncertainty, and by raising the cost of raw materials and contributing to rising inflation, the tariffs are creating headwinds for reshoring manufacturing jobs. As of December 2025, only 36% of companies in the Institute for Supply Management survey were planning to reshore production to the U.S. from abroad. More than half, 64%, said they had no plans to reshore. Uncertainty around tariff policy has contributed to many companies deciding not to reshore because it can take years for new factories to come online. The source for that is the CUNY Journalism School. January 22nd, 2026. Now, the honest documented picture. The headline investment commitments are real and historically large. The PMI improvement is real. The first positive manufacturing job growth in 3 years is real. But 64% of American companies in a recent survey have not committed to reshoring. The gap between announced investment and on-the-ground factory jobs is documented. Building a factory from groundbreaking to full employment takes years. Both things are true simultaneously. And your viewer and the viewers, we the people, deserve to know both of those. Now, here's the third part of today's American economy. The California business exodus. And this is fully documented, recorded documentation. This is one of the most significant corporate migration stories in American history. The numbers are absolutely remarkable, and they are all verified. And they are all thanks to the policies under Gavin Newsom's California. In 2025 alone, major companies relocating out of California included Chevron, moving to Texas, John Paul Mitchell Systems to Wilmer, Texas, Realtor.com to Austin, In-N-Out Burger to Tennessee. California's tax foundation ranking sits at 49th in climate 2024 and 2025. Faces a projected $50 billion to $70 billion deficit in 2025-2026. A stark reversal from the $97 billion surplus recorded in 2021 and 2022. The source for that information is called The Real Deal, December 31st, 2025. And here's the complete verified departure list with destinations and documented reasons. Tesla moved from Palo Alto to Austin, Texas. CEO Elon Musk cited housing costs and scaling limitations. Oracle from the Silicon Valley to Austin, Texas in 2020. Then Nashville, Tennessee in 2024. Tax environment and business climate were the reasons. Chevron from San Ramon, California, where it had been based since 1879, to Houston, Texas. The source for that information was Fox Business. SpaceX, Hawthorne, California, to Starbase, Texas. Elon Musk cited California legislation affecting families and companies. The source on that information is Yahoo Finance. Charles Schwab, out of California, citing high costs. Founder Charles Schwab stated, "The costs of doing business here are so much higher than some other places." Again, Yahoo Finance was the source for that information. Public Storage, Glendale, California, Frisco, Texas, in early 2026, ending more than 5 decades in the state. American Bazaar is the source for that information. Leprino Foods, the world's largest mozzarella cheese maker, supplying Domino's, Pizza Hut, and Papa John's, closed its Central Valley more and moved to Lubbock, Texas. In-N-Out Burger. After 77 years in California, President Lindsay Snyder cited the difficulty of raising a family and operating a business in the state. Here's a good one. Playboy Enterprises, Los Angeles headquarters to Miami Beach, Florida. Playboy even left. Why are they leaving? And this is documented. California has the highest marginal income tax rate in the nation at 13.3% for top earners. The Tax Foundation ranks California 49th in the business tax climate. Texas and Florida have zero state income tax For larger companies, the savings can amount to hundreds of millions of dollars every year. Who wouldn't move? That source is KLW Law. California's proposed 2026 Billionaire Tax Act is accelerating the outflow of ultra-wealthy residents. Texas and Florida posted the largest net population gains, while California recorded some of the steepest losses, according to the IRS and the U.S. Census Bureau data. And here is some documentation on what stays in California. Many companies are doubling down on California. The state is home to world-class universities like Stanford, Berkeley, and Caltech, a deep bench of venture capitalist investors, and unparalleled proximity to Pacific Rim markets. Many companies move headquarters while continuing substantial operations in the state of California. Google, Meta, the majority of semiconductor design, and most venture-backed biotech remains in California. The talent pipeline and venture capital concentration are documented advantages no other state has replicated. The documented truth is this: California is losing the companies most sensitive to tax and regulatory burden. It is retaining companies most dependent on the unique ecosystem it provides. Both movements are happening simultaneously, and both are very real. Now, from the constitutional lens, here's why this matters specifically for the Revere Report. The founders designed a federal system of competing states, each free to set its own policies, specifically so that citizens and businesses could vote with their feet. The 10th Amendment, which we will cover in full on the Revere Report soon, reserves all powers not delegated to the federal government, to the states, and to the people. James Madison called this the genius of the federal system. Not one government imposing a single set of rules on 335 million people. 50 laboratories of democracy, each free to experiment, and citizens free to choose among them. The California business exodus is the founders' federalist design working exactly as intended. States that create conditions attractive to citizens and businesses grow. States that do not face documented consequences. That is not a partisan statement. It is a constitutional design documented in 1787, playing out in real time in 2026. Now, let me close tonight with something I want every American watching to carry with them. We are living through an extraordinary moment in the history of this republic. A war now 97 days old, begun without a formal congressional declaration, is reshaping the global economy. 20% of the world's oil supply flows through a waterway that has been contested, struck, and diplomatically maneuvered over for 3 months. Inside Iran, the people celebrated in the streets when their supreme leader was killed, not because they love war, but because they have lived under documented oppression for 47 years. 21,000 arrested for dissent, 1,500 executed in a single year. And while they were celebrating, a military junta called the IRGC quietly took over their government, replacing one form of tyranny with another. The new supreme leader's whereabouts are unknown, his president cannot reach him, and a military council is running the country. Here at home, companies are making historic investments in American manufacturing, while simultaneously fleeing one of America's largest states for places with lighter government footprints. The Venezuelan oil deal is real, but very limited. The manufacturing reshoring is real, but in its early stages. And the California exodus is real and documented. And the economy sits at a genuine crossroads. Every single one of those stories connects to a principle the founders documented and warned about. Madison warned the concentrated military power without legislative oversight leads to tyranny. That principle is the Iran war and the House War Powers vote. In action right now. Jefferson warned that burdening the future generations with debt is tyranny across time. That principle is the $39 trillion national debt, also in action right now. The 10th Amendment's framework of competing states where citizens vote with their feet is the California Exodus, in action right now. And the founders' belief that an informed citizenry is the only reliable defense of a free republic. That principle is what the Revere Report and the Paul Revere Society are built to honor. Here, I've got 3 things before I close. Subscribe to the Revere Report. Share this stream with one American who deserves to know what we covered tonight. And join the Paul Revere Society. The link for that society is in the bio of the Revere Report. We are a community of Americans who are done being uninformed. Come ride with us. And one more thing. If you are in Las Vegas or visiting the Strip, the Good Luck Barber at 616 South Las Vegas Boulevard. Walk-ins welcome. $10 shave, $40 professional cut. Tell them John sent you. Support local, support American business. That is what this republic was built on. I'm John Shoemaker. This is the Revere Report. The republic belongs to we, the people. It always has. Ride with us.